Hi, welcome to the May 18th, 2021 Club Cubase live stream. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to do a quick audio test to make sure everything is coming through as expected. Hi, welcome to the... All right, everything's sounding good. All right, my name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the live stream today. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I work primarily as a Steinberg product specialist in the United States. I'm presenting from the United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. If you have not attended a live stream before, how this works is you could simply ask questions in the live chat field. Questions can also be submitted in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. As we ask questions, often people's ability to ask questions, it can take me a little bit of time to catch up. So if we could avoid asking the same questions over and over again, if you don't get an immediate response, and as you ask questions, if we could perhaps specify which version of Cubase you're using, which operating system, that information is helpful. We'll try to answer every question as completely and succinctly as possible. We'll go probably for about 4 hours. Later this evening, I will have an index of all the questions and topics that have been covered in the live stream. So we'll have those that you could use as a reference. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been discussed on previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. So you could do that, and that's courtesy of Jan, who has that set up, and he's on the live stream. Some other great resources is of course, the Cubase YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to that, make sure you do that. And also check out the Cubase Nation Discord site. Also, I want to give just a little bit of thanks to Agent K, who's always kind enough to do some moderation when needed. We usually have a pretty well-behaved group, but occasionally we get a nefarious actor. And Agent K is always kind enough to kind of take care of that when it's well ahead in the chat. So we appreciate Jan for the Cubase Index, the Cubase Nation Discord. A lot of effort is put in by Jazz Dude, who will probably be on a hangout if he isn't already, and also to Agent K for his moderation skills. So we will, if you're watching this live, make sure that you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from. If this is your first live stream, make sure that you introduce yourself and let us know it's your first live stream. And we'll let some people get logged in, and we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. All right, so we see Sir Robert from Atlanta. All right, we have Agent K, of course, on. We have Jan. We have from Stockholm. We have Christian D68. We have Jeff Zabelski. John Costigan. I think Jeff's from Chico, California. John's from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Soren in Sweden. All right, so we have Detlef, I believe, is in Dusseldorf. All right. All right, so we see Trance 2020 from Berkshire, UK. We have Uno from Finland. All right, we have Millard Brown from Pennsylvania. All right, so we have Barry Williams from Trinidad and Tobago. All right, and we see Taylor from Pine Grove. All right, so we have Alex from Paris. We have Sable Winters from Bay Area. All right, so we have the XDLA from Cambodia. Okay, so we have Michael Pierce from outside of London. All right, so we have Mike Bello from Melbourne, Australia. Beautiful city. All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Let some more people get logged in. All right, wait about another minute and get started. Great to see everyone on the live stream today. All right, so we have Carlos from Colombia. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I caught one question from Ace Amadeus before when I had kind of logged in earlier and it kind of disappeared from the live chat. And if I remember right, the question was if it was possible to take a chord track and have the chord track play through like I think he asked for a pizzicato string part and have like the arpeggio or the arpeggiator MIDI plugin. So we can show you how we get this set up. So let's say if I just come to the instrument here. So I just loaded up an Iconica instrument. So and I have it set to pizzicato, and I have a chord track here. And since I have this monitor, I can audition through the chord track. And let me just see if I could put the MIDI modifier. I may have to put MIDI insert, but let's say if I just wanted to do this, and let's try eighth notes. I'm not sure. We may have to have the data in the track. Nope, we don't even have to do that. So now that I've put an arpeggiator, because the chord track is playing back through the pizzicato, so this is, and we've now put a MIDI insert for an arpeggio on it. So instead of just it playing in real time here, if I wanted to just do like a real time effect, taking where it's just going to play almost like a block chord. And now if I enable the arpeggio, I could just come over here and without even having any parts playing, just the chord track that's playing through the monitored tracks. And if I wanted to switch, without even having to write a single note, you could have different types of arpeggios, and if you want to switch to play order. So you could just kind of easily come up with new parts, just kind of using that without even having a MIDI part in. Now, if I wanted to actually capture that MIDI part, I could just hit record here, and I'm going to hit record in Cubase. And at that point, as you wanted to take, let's say if I drag these parts down and I could put on the, we have just block chords here that we see. But if I wanted to turn that into the arpeggios on the MIDI part, I could just go to my MIDI and choose to freeze MIDI modifiers. And now each of the parts will be just arpeggiated out. So that's how you could kind of create arpeggios with different string instrument sounds derived from the chord track. Okay, let me just go look for some more questions. I know we had some. We'll get through some of the introductions. Okay, so we have a question from Alex Gregorian. Hi, I hope you're fine. My question is why all licenses are scanning when we open Cubase. So, generally, Cubase, I'm not sure if it's, it will do some license calls just to make sure that the license is, if you're using an USB e-licenser, to make sure that the license is actually connected to the computer. So it's pretty standard. Most, DAWs and a lot of programs will do scans for licenses. So. All right, so we see from Sheck Contreb B or Contreb. Hi, Greg. Thanks a lot for telling last time to key binding G and H for zooming. Yeah, that's always a good one. Don't forget Shift G and H if you're not familiar with it. You can just hit, if you look at the MIDI part here, or I'll just get to the main project window, that if we hit G and H, or if we hit Shift G and H, we could zoom vertically with Shift GH and GH to zoom horizontally. Okay, Jeff Sabelski wants people to hit the thumbs up button. All right. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. Is it possible to solo more than one band at a time in the imager? So let's give it a shot. I will. Come over here. Okay, so one of the cool things that we have in the Imager plugin is the ability to, it's now a multi-band imager. So if I wanted to come over here, let's just get to our Imager plugin so that we could apply different amounts of kind of stereo width or mono width. All right, so we could solo each individual band. So I'm seeing if there's any other, like... So I guess if you wanted to solo two bands, you could just... Let's see if that... So it looks like the soloing is kind of a true absolute solo. So it doesn't look like you can solo multiple bands. I'll try a couple of key commands here, maybe some modifier keys, and see if that makes a difference. Doesn't seem like it is. I'll try a couple more combinations. Yeah, so I don't know of a way to solo, so I guess it's going to be kind of more of an absolute. So it looks like it's only going to be the solo will only solo one band at a time. Sorry about that, Taylor. Kind of does make sense in some ways. Okay. So we have a feature request from Taylor. So it says MIDI invert function with options to invert by absolute scale or intervals. Okay. So one of the things that you might be able to do, Taylor, and we sometimes get different requests for this type of function. But let's say if I just had some different MIDI information here, I'll just blow it up so we could all see it a little easier. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and put in some MIDI parts here quickly. Okay, so if I wanted to come here, we could just go to, let's say, our MIDI, and we can go to here. We could just go to your functions, and at this point, you could, choose to mirror the MIDI data. And if you wanted to also combine that, Taylor, with additional functions, so let's say options to invert by absolute or scale intervals, you could combine that with a logical editor preset in a macro. So at this point, you could say, I wanted to, invert first, and then I wanted it to, keep value 1. Let's say type is equal to note, and I wanted to take value 1, our pitch, and then we could choose to transpose to scale. So if I say, okay, I want it to now do the inversion and transpose it to D major, you could do some stuff like that in combining, like, the mirror or reverse, and then combining it directly here with the actual scale correction. And let's see if we want to do if there's any kind of more inversion functions here in the action target that might be applicable for this. So here we're just going to be doing pitch. So, think of combining, perhaps the reverse or mirror function. And, you could also just have it transposed directly to the scale. But I could pass that on. I know some of the developers are always kind of looking for interesting MIDI applications like that. All right, so we have a question. What are the differences between HSO and Iconica? So Iconica, we can think of HSO as kind of very much like a 2000 era instrument library. So it's going to be much smaller. And once we get into Iconica, we could think of that as kind of like a 2020, 20 years later of technology. So with Iconica, you're going to have just a lot of additional functionality. So you're going to have more control for round robins, different mic positions, a much larger sample set that you'll have. So as soon as I want to, let's go to the instrument here, we'll just kind of show. So if we wanted to, HSO will allow you to have kind of fixed articulations, where once we're doing this, we could choose to, see our different articulations, and we could customize these as we want. So if I wanted to switch between my different articulations, we can see round robins. Once we start getting into the mixing, we could choose to have the balance between the close mic, a deca tree, as well as main. So you can have a lot more capabilities where it's going to just do round robins through multiple samples. So it's not doing like a machine gun like type of effect. With Iconica, you also will get more percussion. You get harp and more kind of tuned percussion, like pitched percussion instruments. So Iconica is a much larger library. You could get great results with, even the HSO, because like an oboe sound hasn't really changed. If it was sampled well 20 years ago, it'll still sound, an oboe, the sound hasn't evolved. But if you wanted a lot more expression, a lot more capabilities, then and more control, where you could say, okay, on this, I wanted to switch between spiccato, and let's say I wanted to add on this layer, I wanted to go from spiccato to legato, and I wanted this to be separated, and we could choose that this will be separated by, you know, key switch, or this will be separated by velocity, at what velocity level. So at this point, you could have just a tremendous amount of control over how you want the articulations to be switched. All right, so we have Giddy also from Australia. Thanks. Probably people working the night shift. But thanks for joining us. Australia is one of my favorite countries I've ever visited. So it's always great to see people in Australia. I realize it's not a convenient time there. Okay, so we have a question. When recording an instrument track, is there any difference between recording with track monitor on or off? I don't notice any change. Not really. If we're working with the instrument track, let me just add one here. So let's say I wanted to add a HALion Sonic SE, and I'll just add a little bit of woodwinds. So if I wanted to just record on one track, so let's say if I'm here, I could hear my woodwinds, and if I wanted to now hear the pizzicato or the strings, but at this point, if I only wanted to record the strings, but I wanted to hear the winds. So now as I would record, I could still monitor the winds. I could monitor this track while we're recording, but not record on that particular track. So as I come here, let me just take it out of the loop. So now, so I'll just go ahead and hit record. So now only one track is recorded, and while we could use this track to monitor. Now when I play it back, we're going to hear the strings, because this one I was just monitoring the two sounds together, but I could, choose to monitor both sounds together and only record on one. And that's why you have kind of a separate monitor for the VST instruments. All right, so we have Guillaume from Barcelona. Thank you for joining us. All right, so we have a question. Sorry, my chat field, which will occasionally jump, just did. All right, so I see I have lots of questions ahead of me. Yeah, so we see Jeff Zabelski just has some great comments because he's just got his Iconica. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to get the peaks to hold in SuperVision? All right, so let me just jump back to another project here. And I'll open up SuperVision. Okay, so let's say if we come over here to okay, so let's say if I just kind of select my level meters, go to the settings. So here you could have the peak hold, like on the level meters, or, let me just say I'll just do a brand new instance of SuperVision here. So this might be set kind of per meter, but if I just wanted to click on the settings cogwheel We have 4 seconds for my peak hold. That's good. Stop. And we'll see our peaks. We're now at 9.1 seconds. And we can see that one kind of trail off. So, each meter, try clicking on the little settings cogwheel for the active module. So if I'm here in this, you may have to click and just choose the settings cogwheel so you can see duration here. So, each one of the separate meters, you could probably, where applicable, you could adjust kind of the hold time. So give that a shot. So if I just wanted to come and we can see our, as we just come directly here, so go to the settings, and then you can have the different peak hold times for various meters as needed. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to zoom the wave vertically in the detect silence window? All right, so let me just go ahead and create let me just go to a file that might have some detect silence in it. So we'll take a look at our vocal file. Thanks for all wonderful questions. Let's come here to our detect silence. So we'll go to audio to advanced. And will you see our detect silence? So let's see if there's a way to, I'm not sure if there's a way to zoom the waveform here, but let me just. So it looks like we could zoom vertically or horizontally, but not vertically. But let me see if I make, if I do a change in this waveform zoom here, if that's carried over. I don't think it would be, but we'll give it a shot. So it doesn't look like that's kind of carried over. So it doesn't seem to be a way to zoom horizontally, or zoom vertically, just horizontally. But I mean, that should give you a pretty good, indication of like what you wanted to strip out, I would think. But if you had low level amplitude, you might, let's see if we could just go to, one other thing that you could do is maybe if you're in the offline processor, a similar approach might be just to come over here to dynamics and say you wanted to apply a gate to the different tracks where you could see that kind of visually, but you don't necessarily see the waveform. So. Okay, we have a question. Should DC offset be removed from each individual track before mixing or only from a mix track? I would always just kind of check a mix track. I would do the mix down file and see if there's note if you have a lot of DC offset, I would maybe take a look to see if you could find one particular track that is causing it. Like maybe you were doing a shared project and people are recording in different facilities or home studio or whatever, and then you notice that the bass player you know, his tracks seem to have a DC offset issue, then you could fix it on an individual track. But I would look for it first in like the exported mix and see if it's going to be an issue. And then if it's going to be where you're going to be doing this over and over again, I would consider maybe looking for like the offensive track and try to fix the source. All right, so we have Ustin from Ukraine checking in. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Taylor, this just started. When I click once on anything, it behaves like when I double click. Is there a preference setting to get me back to double clicking to open editors and plugins? So let me just see if I come over here. So I don't think that you know is, I'm not sure if you see that, Taylor, with if you have like multiple mice or if there's maybe a mouse setting, but I don't think that there's any preference in Cubase, you know, because generally once would be double clicking and twice would launch it into an editor. So I don't think it's just kind of generally how mice work. I don't think that there's any editing preferences that do that. I have seen similar behavior. I've experienced it like when my computer mouse button is malfunctioning. I've also seen some people, yeah, I went through this with a customer on a phone for a long time. And it ends up that they had an old keyboard, you know, like a Bluetooth keyboard, and they had it on, you know, like on the floor, and a book came and rested on like the control key. So anytime that they were trying to do something, it was, you know, acting as if there was a modifier key pressed on it. But, you know, I would see if there is a different mouse setting or maybe the mouse sensitivity, but I don't think there's anything that, you know, one click launches the editor. So just kind of looking at it. But I would, you know, see if you have the same behavior if you have a laptop, if you're used the touch screen, if you get the same results as when you're using a mouse, and let us know. But that's kind of a strange one, but I don't think it's a Cubase preference. And also from Taylor, it says, when I try to lasso a MIDI note, sometimes it puts a MIDI note on the mouse click. So let's say if I'm here and I try to, so if, you know, if you hold down kind of, you know, like the Alt key, that will draw notes in. So, you know, but I would check to see if you have, you know, like if it's a specific, maybe the keyboard is sticking or your computer's mouse is misfiring. So I'm not sure if you have like a backup mouse that you could try, but I would investigate that, Taylor. And I think that you know, when you click once on everything, it behaves like you double click and drawing in the note, you know. So now, you know, if you just double click here, that would draw notes in as well. So I think that the two are going to be related. So if I just double click and draw, you could just do that with kind of the object selection tool. So it seems like those two would be related. And I think it's going to be kind of a physical thing from your mouse or computer keyboard. All right, so we have Tim from Mission Viejo. Great to see you, Tim. Tim Weinheimer. All right, and we have Gregory checking in from Paris. All right, and Townsville, Australia, and Ron from the Netherlands. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so we have a question from Matt Smith. What tips do you have for quick tracking while working with a vocalist or instrumentalist? I'm interested in things like quick cursor movement, turning on and off monitoring, etc. So generally, I like to have my monitoring set for tape machine style. So if I just wanted to come here, I'm just going to add an audio track here. Okay, so when I have tape machine style monitoring, and we could set this up in preferences. So if we go to VST, we can set the auto monitoring style to tape machine. And this way you won't have to kind of fiddle. So as you're playing, so let's say if I'm here and I'm playing and I record. All right, now when I just go back, so let's say I just will, so I'll have this in record enable. So now when I go to playback, notice that the monitoring is shut off. And if I wanted to punch in, as soon as I go into record, the monitoring is enabled. And if I wanted to punch out to listen to the other parts, we could just, you know, the monitoring will engage when it's in record. One other, you know, thing that's really helpful, you know, one is naming your files before you record them. There is I think under transport, where you could do re-record mode. So if you have someone that's just kind of continuing to, you know, make errors. So let's say I wanted to do a quick punch. So I would just, if I wanted to punch a section, I would hit P after setting kind of the range locators. And then you could hit I and O, and that would be like punch in, punch out. So let's say if we were doubling this vocal, and they're like, okay, I just wanted to punch in this word, I would hit P and then I-O. And that way, as soon as we come here, it's just going to punch in that phrase based on the range selection, punch out. So you could do that. Now, another thing that's really helpful is re-record mode. So, you know, when someone is continually messing up, you can enable this in the transport bar. So we'll go to common record modes. So let's say we're just recording here. So I say, okay, we're just going to start recording. We give them like 4-bar count or 4-beat count in. And let's say they just messed up. When you're in re-record mode, instead of stopping, erasing, rewinding, I could just hit the record button again. And that would automatically just give me my count in, take you right back to where you were. Let's say, okay, false take, hit the record button again, and it will just take you right back without having to rewind, find your spot. So stuff like that can really make a big difference in kind of speeding up different workflows with kind of tracking. Okay, so we have a question from Mike Bello. So it says, question about low cut filter and channel settings, testing it using SuperVision to monitor. I'm noticing it doesn't do much below 150 hertz. Setting EQ1 to low cut seems to work much better. Why is this? All right, so let's come over here and I'll just import quickly. Let's put a test tone on our file here. So let's go ahead and I'll make sure I don't kill you with a test tone generator here. So I will put an insert and let's put on under our test generator. So let's put on some white noise. Okay, so now when we look at our frequency response here. Okay, so we see pretty even frequency response. Let's come over to our inserts. And when we see just, I'll just put just a frequency on. Okay, so I'll come over here. Let's say we'll do our spectrum bar. Okay, so when I go to my low cut here, or let's say, yeah. All right, so let me just. All right, so I'm just going to activate one of the. Okay, so we see that. So you can see, let me just. So it seems like there should be. So I'm not sure why I would think that we would see more of that. Let me just try it on. Okay, and let me just. All right, so it's not, it doesn't seem to be engaging here, but let's say if I. So let's say if we take this. So I take the vocal here, you can see. You can see kind of a pretty dramatic change there with just the low cut. So, but I'm not, let me just try one other. Let's try just adding in our track here. Okay, so let's. Okay, so now I think, sorry, I just forgot to turn the band on. So I'm not sure, I'm not seeing on this particular track, but we definitely saw it on the vocal tracks. I may just be routing of how I have it done, but when we looked at the vocal track here and had this soloed, you could definitely see kind of the change there in the pre-section. So, so yeah, let me know, try that mic and see, but that looked like it seems to be working. But make sure like you don't make the same mistake I just did and forget to actually just click on the on button and see. But you can see on the vocal made a difference. And maybe if I had an audio track with it on, that may make a difference as well. It could be why it's not working with just a test tone. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so we have the Monk Beats checking in from Italy. Thanks for joining us. All right, question. How does Greg usually use Squasher on multiple tracks? Which instruments does Squasher fit extra well on? So, you know, I've used it on, you know, different things. You know, I've used it on, you know, just drums. I've used it on, you know, different like drum buses. So say if I just wanted to jump here where, you know, and many times you know, so drums I use it on quite a bit. Sometimes bass. I put on a couple bass tracks, but let's say if I'm here and I think I have just give you an idea. So let's say here we have Squasher, and Squasher is like a really aggressive kind of a multi-band up-down compressor. So, but don't just use it in this context. So let's say if I just want to put on so here I have kind of the drums separated from the rest of the mix. So a lot of times people would use Squasher just on like to give the drums the extra edge, especially kicks. But let's listen to what it does on just the rest of the instruments. So you can hear how that synth and vocal now kind of pop out. And if I wanted to just combine both of them. So we take it off the kick. So this is where people would often expect to do it, but let's say if I wanted to go back to the Beatles and Stones song and put it on the master bus there, and we'll see what that sounds like. So we'll activate this. So I've never tried this, but we'll just try it on something different. So if we turn that off.
Musical history laid out on the floor. I've got to choose what's mine and what's yours. 'Cause now you're asking Beatles or Stones, something by that.
So anything that kind of, you know, I like to think of Squasher as anything that kind of needs that little bit of edge to cut through the mix. That Squasher will kind of bring that particular like track out pretty easily. All right, so we see Jeff Sabelsky's finally got all of his Iconica installed, so I'll go check out your SoundCloud account. Thanks, Jeff, for sharing. All right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas on our live stream. He's always generous to give out virtual ice cream. And I have to say I enjoyed playing bass on on the Dark Glass track, Michael. So I got the bass line into Gareth. I say, okay, so we see question. I like to exchange CPR files with my band members. I use Cubase Pro. The others use Cubase Elements 11. All use different hardware interfaces. Which settings do we always have to make? I would try to, as long as the audio file, you have the same audio files and you're using common plugins between, you should be okay. I would avoid, passing on stuff that had, VariAudio, and if it wasn't, or if you've done like a lot of audio alignment or maybe some more advanced sampler track stuff, those are some of the things. But if it's just like, here's some MIDI tracks and audio, I don't think you'll run into any problems. So. All right, so we see, it says, hi, Greg, I sent you a question via email yesterday regarding dragging MIDI from VST instruments. Always creates new MIDI or instrument tracks despite preferences, MIDI file import. And this is in Nuendo 11. I believe that this was with Groove Agent you had mentioned. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. So I'm going to add an instance of Groove Agent here. So I didn't have any of the problems, but I'll show you how I do it. So let me just load a pattern or kit with some patterns. Okay, so now I'll just come here. And as we listen to this, we can have... So our patterns, and we're going to be just at the bottom here. So when I do this, I just drag it right to the actual part, just like that. Let's see if I drag it over here. So with Groove Agent, it just seems like it just is, dragging it. I drag it directly to the Groove Agent track, and then that is just there probably. So if I sloppy about it, let's see if I could recreate that. So all I'm doing here is just dragging where I see the blue line, and if I drag it below that, it will create a MIDI part. But when I drag the Groove Agent directly onto the track, it gets added right onto that track, which kind of makes sense to me. But let me know if you're doing anything different. All right, so we see a question from Soren. Says, Greg, I know you might not have full insight into business like this, but I need to ask you anyways. Spectral Layers expected to make new version once a year. So I'm not sure if, I know we have kind of Cubase on that schedule. I don't think it's, we come out with new versions every year for the sake of coming out with a new version every year. So I haven't heard of other timeline for new Spectral Layers versions. I haven't seen any documentation with that. Sometimes they don't tell me because they know I talk to thousands of people every day, every week. So I don't necessarily get that information, but I could see if I could find out if there's any updates. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Could you explain sample management and latency when we want to use for less latency? Thank you so much. So generally, when we have, let's say we have our sampler here, let's say our drums, and we're going to play these particular samples like so. And right now it's a pretty responsive latency. So if we adjust latency, we can go to the studio menu to studio setup, select the audio interface, and now if I wanted to, increase the latency, let's say to something rather large, like 2048 samples, now when I hit, you'll notice that it's going to be a bit delayed. And so, but as we increase latency, that is going to make it easier for the computer to play back the audio stream. So we can think of it like a conveyor belt. And if you had to pack up 2048 samples at once, you'd have a little bit of a buffer to kind of, if something went wrong, to get all those pieces together, rather than putting 256 or 32 in a box where you have to be totally on top of your game. So now, what can also cause additional latency is if you have plugins, and some plugins will impose latency. So if we have multi-band compressors, or kind of good culprits of this, convolution reverbs are also good culprits of this. So they can have higher latency. So now when I go to hit a note and to trigger the sample, there's going to be latency. And we could actually, if you go to the Cubase mixer, the full screen mixer, you could enable we go here to the setup, there's a channel latency monitor. So I can see that just by putting those two plugins, that it's adding 251 milliseconds, a quarter of a second of latency. So if I wanted to quickly avoid plugins that add a lot of latency, we could just click on the constrained delay compensation. And now as soon as I do that, I could play back those different samples without the typical latency that you would expect, because we basically told Cubase to bypass any plugins that have that high latency. So when I turn this back on and hit, but now we could just bypass all the plugins that have a particular latency, and you could set the threshold for the latency in the actual Cubase preferences. Now it'll play back with those plugins engaged. You can see and probably hear the latency of me clicking my mouse first and then the sample coming. So those are some ways. So try lowering the buffer and try the constrained delay compensation. All right, so we see Michael Teams is passing on ice cream to Jan for the CubaseIndex.com. All right, so we see Arfo62 says, "Hi Greg, hi everybody from Italy. Sorry, I have not much time to stay, so that's fine. You could always come back and watch it afterwards." All right, so we have John Shaman. Welcome back. Great to see you. Okay, so we see QST, I guess it's a VST render in place for external instrument channel works for the MIDI parts on the instrument track, not on other MIDI tracks assigned to that instrument. Why? Need rack repeat differences between instrument and rack. All right, so when we're dealing with an external instrument, you could connect the external instrument directly into your audio connections here, and we could have your external instruments as we look at this. So we could connect the outputs of your external instruments to inputs of your audio interface. So, and at that point, we could just say, I want to add an instrument track, and I go to my external instruments. Let's say, okay, I have my Yamaha Montage, and now I'm going to be using that particular instrument. So we could think of that, it's going to have kind of a one-to-one relationship between those. So because we have that MIDI channel that's defined, and we know what that latency path is. So we could, if we have MIDI information, we could do a render in place and turn it into audio. So if you're doing that with multiple, multiple instruments or multiple sounds within that external instrument, you could just simply, if you have the outputs, just kind of set it up so that, the different sounds can each be defined as your external input on your audio interface. Now, I understand a lot of people may not have that capability in their instruments or in their audio interface. And this is, the convenience of working with VST instruments is we don't have to worry about that. So some of the differences that we see between rack and, or VST instrument tracks and MIDI tracks is MIDI tracks can go to an instrument rack, a VST instrument, or to the outside world. So if you're sending it to an external keyboard, the MIDI tracks can go there. An instrument track can only go to the instrument, but the instrument track is going to kind of combine the automation. So we add an instrument track, we click on the edit channel button, we see the audio characteristics because we know that it's a virtual instrument and it's already part of the audio stream, so that we could have everything kind of tied together. Whereas a MIDI track, you could have a MIDI fader for the volume, the MIDI CC 7, and you could, if it's routed to a virtual instrument, that return channel can also be where you could apply EQ. So, inherently working with software instruments, is a lot more flexible unless you have, some additional hardware. So, what I have in my studio, and I have 23 external instruments MIDI wise. I have just I have two Mackie LM3204s, and within, 12 rack spaces, that gives me 64 inputs. And I could just simply send those to an Alt34 bus. And when I need to capture my MIDI, I just simply, set up a stereo audio track and I hit the Alt34 bus on a particular channels and I could record it. So those are, some of the advantages. And, one other huge advantage of working with virtual instruments is their timing is inherently better. So they also are sample accurate in timing. And if you do comparisons, sending the same MIDI data to a virtual instrument versus any external instrument, the timing is always going to be much tighter with actual VST instruments. Okay. Okay, so you see Gareth got the bass line that I recorded for him last night. That was a good, I enjoyed that song a lot. All right, so we see Joe Grado, he's checking in on his first live stream. Welcome. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And we hope to see you on future live streams as well. Okay, we have a question from Jeff Sabelski. Greg, using orchestral instruments in HALion Sonic, the virtual keyboard has scale lit up outside the range, is grayed out, but not the key editor on its virtual keyboard. Can that be synced? So, so there isn't a way to sync it. And, the key editor should still be able to transmit all MIDI notes because those notes may be out of range. So we'll just show what Jeff is talking of. So let's say if I go to HALion Sonic SE and I just load up I'll just do not an ensemble, but let's do a player. So let's say at this point, I just want to go to violins. So here we can see that these notes in white, those are the instrument range. But we also send MIDI notes, MIDI messages, like to switch sound. So if I click on this note, and if I click on this note, this changes the samples. Click on that note. And let's say we click on the F sharp. So, even though the instrument is still only playing within this range, when we go to the key editor, it still should show all of the notes because you may want to, if you have multiple parts selected, so let's say I have violins and cello, at this point, I could still see the other notes, but I could also see if I'm working with just key switches, I could also just see and draw in key switches. So I don't think that it makes sense to block, the notes because all of the notes are available within the MIDI key editor. Even if it's out of the instrument range, because those MIDI notes can still be used for other things. So I just see from Uston or Uston, this is a screenshot how it looks, so you can quickly get an idea to reproduce it. So I'm not sure if the screenshot is actually going to carry over on the live stream, but let me know if what I did was different than how you work in dragging the files over. All right, and we see Joe's from New York City area, so thanks for joining us. And Michael Teams are giving you two scoops of ice cream. So, all right, Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button. Okay, my chat field jumped on me. Just find my spot. Sorry about this. Okay, so I think I found my spot. All right, so sorry about that. All right, so we see sub 403 on the live stream now. All right, and we have Razel checking in from Denmark. Okay, so we have a question from Rodney Foster. Is Intel or AMD better for music production computers? Which is the best? I think that you could, some people, and I know Jazz Dude, I'm not sure if he's on the live stream, he builds a lot of computer systems and configures lots of computer systems, and he really likes the Ryzen series. I think either, if you get a good computer that, if you get a good processor and good components that aren't going to be kind of affecting your audio performance, and sometimes it could be down to stuff like, the video card or the network card, which can affect performance quite a bit. But either solution you can get great results with. Maybe some other people could share their experiences. All right, wonderful that Pablo has made the live stream from Galicia, España. All right. All right, so we see Taylor saying, I'm really liking this multi-band imager. It's so much better than the one that came with Ozone 8. So that's great. Glad you're liking it. I think it's a great tool. We see Pablo saying he needs more drumsticks. Are they included with his Cubase license? And he's asking in jest. All right. Okay, so you see a question from Joe. I'm not familiar with Iconica. Does that come with HALion? I'm on Cubase Pro 9.5. So Iconica is a large orchestral instrument that plays back through HALion or HALion Sonic SE that comes with your Cubase Pro 9.5. So it's sold separately, and it's a very extensive orchestral sample instrument. All right, so we have Joseph checking in from Nigeria, just thanking us for the awesome lecture. Thanks for joining us. All right, and we've learned that, according to Michael Teams, that Pablo is El Jefe, so that's good to know. He's an important guy. Okay, we have a question. I have a Stomp box I bought new maybe 3 years ago. There was a version of Cubase available for download. I never did. Would it still be available, or do you think it's too old by now? So if you have a license and you haven't used it, if you still have the license, it will actually, when you go to enter it in, it's probably a download access code or an e-licenser code, depending on what year it was done. So if you have not activated the license, you could still create a My Steinberg account and activate the license, and it will give you the latest version. So it's still good, and I would, definitely try it out. All right, so I see a question from Ace Amadeus. It says how to enter some chords and use Arpeggi to play staccato violins, single notes from the chords. So I did catch that, but I know the live stream lost it, Ace, but it was the very first question that we did. So if you wanted to jump back in time, you could see how we did it. All right, so we have James from Pylon Records checking in. Thanks for joining us. You see Pablo is bragging that he's an employee from the Hot Mess Band. All right, wonderful to see Matt Elston from London on the live stream. Okay, so we have, hi Greg, wondering if VariAudio can be automated, thinking of formant effects like down, up on a vocal. So you could do that within VariAudio. So if you just wanted to go to VariAudio, you could do stuff like that if you wanted to, but I can show you another way. So let's say if I just wanted to take a single word here in VariAudio, I could split it. And at this point, I will go to see all smart controls, and then you could shift the formants of each segment independently. So if you didn't want to do that, one other tool that's included with Cubase that you could automate is if you go to the inserts and under pitch shift, you could go to pitch correct. And here you see a formant shift, and this could be automated. So let's say I'll do horrible things to the vocal here. All right, and I'll just revert this quickly because I like the song too much. All right, so this is a kind of a cool little trick. I used to do this a lot in demos where, you know, when you have to make the singer sound, you know, just a variation or make the singer sound younger or older. So you could just come over here to the pitch shift and the pitch correct plugin. So
We played our records into the night.
So let's say I just want to shift up, and I could automate this as well. So I can just come here.
That was okay.
So if you wanted to just do silly stuff like,
Now you're packing boxes, ready to leave. Our musical history laid out on the floor. I've got to choose what's mine and what's yours.
and then everything that we just did was completely automated. So if you're looking for like quick formant type of manipulation, you know, you could do it kind of manually in VariAudio, but probably a more fluid tool might be using the pitch correct plugin. So give that a shot. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to select the next and previous MIDI notes with key commands? Okay. So I think we have some bass in here. Okay. Okay, so let's say I have this and I have a note selected. Just hit the left and right arrow keys. So the left arrow key. So left arrow key to select the previous note, right arrow key to select the next note. Okay, so we have, Greg, would it be possible to make a macro who goes from one sound to another in HALion? Idea would be to make a MIDI track with some notes and test different sounds automatically. Okay, so let's say I just wanted to, I'll just add a instrument track here. So let's say we'll do HALion. I'm not sure if it's HALion or HALion 6. I'll just do the full HALion, but the principle I'll show you will be applicable to all of them. So let's say now I just wanted to take this bass line here, and I'll put this into a loop, and we'll solo. And let me just look for bass, and we'll say electric bass sound. So I will just go ahead, load this one up. Okay, so if I wanted to kind of just audition sounds, I think if we just kind of, so once you have your filters set here, you could, I think just, okay, so let's say now I'm going to come over here. So I click on the little icon at the top, and let's say I'm looking for bass, electric bass. And then you notice that once I select there, it's going to load up the next patch. And then I just hit the down key, and that will load up the next preset for you. So I'm not sure if you need a macro to do that. But, once you have that, you could just come right over here. And as you just kind of, once you're in this mode, you don't have to hit anything. You just kind of park over the preset, and that will just load up that particular patch. So you can kind of automate the process of auditioning different sounds. So let me know if that works for you. But I think that should help. That's what I do with different projects. I'm looking for different sounds. Okay, so we see from Peter Lawson, Greg, I have an IVR to produce tomorrow. Please take me through the production process. I'm trying to, sorry, I'm going to plead ignorance on what an IVR is, but maybe if you could let me know what an IVR is, I'd be happy to help out. So, yeah, let me know if. Yeah, I see Gareth is speculating intravenous reggae, so. Okay, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, I'm on a new Mac Pro Intel with Cubase 11. For some reason, Cubase will not save my project synchronization settings. I have to reset them every time I restart Cubase. All right, so let's give it a shot here. Okay, so let me go to. All right, so let's say MIDI timecode destinations, and I want those first two for MIDI clock destinations, and let's say MIDI timecode out of there. I'm going to give it just a quick bit of MIDI notes here just to give it some data. All right, so let's just take a quick look at our project sync setup again. So we come over here, we'll have activate external sync, and we'll have top 2, 3, bottom 1. Okay. Okay, let's close this project and let's get to our project sync set up. Okay, so the external sync is activated. Top 2, 3, 1. So those all appear to be saved within my project. One thing to try, if you're on your Mac, try holding down Command, Option, and Shift right after you start Cubase, and see if you could temporarily disable the program preferences if it behaves the same way. So let me know if I did something differently than you did, Ian, but I have a Mac with Intel as well in Cubase 1102. Okay, I just see, later comment, you already tried trashing and rebuilding preferences. That didn't solve it. Okay, so we have a question. Why is the inspector blank when selecting stereo out? Like to see regular track like options. Okay, so let's say I go here to my stereo out. So when I come here, I see my inserts, fader. There's no sends because it's the last step in the signal flow. So your stereo out. But when I just come here to my stereo out, I could see the fader and inserts. So let me know if, and it's from Benny Solderberg, if yours looks different if your inspector looks different on your master output. I wonder also if the project is not active. Let me just activate another project. That when I click here, if the project is inactive, it may show blank, but I assume that the project is active. But as soon as I go to the stereo out here, I see my inserts and channel EQ, etc. All right, so I just see Peter Lawson kind of clarified that IVR is interactive voice response. If you could maybe give some information on what you need set up for interactive voice response, that would be helpful. All right, so we see Roland Klein. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. Just saying hi, long time no see. Long time no see, been working. So thanks for taking time out and joining us. Okay, so we have a question from John McDonough Music. Hi, Greg. What would be your most reliable way to prepare the proper dB level for export for distribution directly from Cubase? Do I need any special plugins, etc.? No, you don't need any special plugins. Just kind of be aware, as you're mixing, you have different meters, and you could kind of work within these particular meters. So I'll activate this, and different distribution platforms now will have different metering scales that they like to work with. So broadcast, one of the more common meters you see, is not necessarily represented in dB, but in loudness units. So as I come over here, you could go to a meter. And a lot of people on dB meters will try to aim for like -6-ish, but you could also go to loudness. So as we work with this, you may adjust kind of your... So like a lot of times when you're distributing something for Spotify likes to aim for a -14 loudness units. If you're doing it for broadcast, so if you're a composer, broadcast generally likes to come in at -23 loudness units. So you could kind of set up, and if you've done a whole mix and you say, okay, I have my mix down file, let's say something that looks like this, and you're like, okay, I have my mix and I want to make sure that it's kind of at optimum level, you could just come to audio and go to processes, and you could normalize, and you may have different deliveries for different services. So you could say, okay, I want to normalize to -6 dB or to -14 loudness units. So if I was doing this I would say, okay, we want it to be for Spotify or Amazon Music. I would say, just scale that up to -14 loudness units, and then you're okay. Now, if this is going to be broadcast, I could just say, okay, here's our broadcast level, and type in -23 loudness units, and it'll just do, and then the levels will be set. But you don't need any special plugins. You have all the metering that you need in Cubase, and just kind of be aware of the different meter options. Okay. Okay, so I just see, Greg, will you pass on that Yukon needs another update? Meters readout on Avid Control app stays at 0 and is not working properly. So I'll pass it on, but I would, make sure that, I think I would have heard about that, but, I'm not sure if it's, if you're using like the iPad app for that. But if you could let me know, but I'll definitely pass it along. Okay, so we see a question. Hi, I work a lot with the Geno styles. Can I play in Cubase styles? Is there a style track so that I can control it with the chord track? I don't think that, most of the arranger keyboard, like arranger workstations, and I could check with some of my colleagues at Yamaha, but I think that, most of the arranger workstations are kind of their own internal ecosystem. Excuse me, let me just clear my throat. So I don't think it's actually capable of being driven from an outside sequencer. But I will go ahead and check with some of my Yamaha colleagues. If you wanted to reach out to me via email, you could call me at, or you could email me rather at clubcubase@steinberg.de. But I think, most of the arranger workstations aren't really intended to interface with anything other than themselves. And that's kind of why people buy them, because it's its own kind of self-contained environment. All right, so we see Pablo has forgotten his question again. So, okay, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. Love the Hangouts. Thank you. I can't seem to drag and drop my isolated vocal from Spectral Layers into Cubase Pro 10.5. I could do it in 11 Pro. Why is that, and how can I fix it in 10.5 Pro? That was one of the new features that came in version 11, so I'm not sure if you'll see it implemented into Cubase 10.5. So it is, just one of the new features. So. Okay, so a question, Greg, is there a way to mono the bass at 150 kilohertz and below on a stereo track? Do we need a plugin? So you need a plugin, but fortunately the plugin comes with Cubase, so I would just do the Imager plugin. So let's go to Spatial and Panner and go to Imager. So let's say I'm here, so we have this, conveniently set right around 150 hertz. So let's say we'll take our bass, we'll take our jazz piece here. So I want to just solo these frequencies, and I could adjust the width to make it wider or just narrower. So at this point, you could just solo I'll just pull up one that might have some more information. Let me just get a different file just to show you on this. So let's say I want to take this and just maybe on my master bus. So I can just grab the imager plugin. And then I can make the highs a little wider. And let's take the low end here. And instead of having that, be wide, I just want that to be very narrow. So if you want the low end to be a little kind of out of control, maybe a little more, but just take, just come right here. It's already set at 150 hertz, and just change the width there. So that's kind of all you have to do. So you can run that on individual tracks or, on the entire mix, wherever you wanted to do it. So. You see Uno Memento commenting on Pablo's inability to remember his question, and he's saying his problem is bigger, that he has no questions. So it must be nice to have Cubase all figured out. It's my lifelong quest. All right, so we have Chrome Boy just checking in and apologizing for being late. So if you're late, you don't have to worry about, apologizing. It's fine. It's a dynamic schedule. We're not in class. We're not in school. So, but I appreciate kind of the weird sense of respect. So, and we see Tim Weinheimer is commenting that Michael Teams has the best ice cream flavors. They are very creative. Okay, so we see Space Crawlers having problems with the stream. It's back, so. Okay, so I see Michael Pierce had a comment that he thinks that the pre-filter is coming. This is with the noise, that it was actually routed before the EQ, so that makes sense. So let's say if I come to, let's go generate an audio track. It's my brain cramp error. Thank you, Michael, for pointing that out. So let's say on this track, I want to send this track to a group. I'll make it a stereo group. Okay, so on this track, we're going to put the test tone generator. Let's make it white noise again. All right, and we're going to send this to group 2. So now when I come to this particular group channel, we'll turn this on. So you get here that, and we'll open up our control room inserts so we can see that as well. So now as I adjust the so you can see that correlation there. So it seems to be working pretty effectively, I think. So Thank you, Michael, for pointing out my error. So it's just brain cramp on my part. So okay, so we have it says easy question. Is there a quick key to move the whole screen right and left and up and down without using the manual sliders? So if we wanted to, let's say if I hold down the shift key, I could just use the mouse scroll wheel to navigate just like that. And then using the up and down arrow keys, we can navigate up and down here. So shift, and then if we hold down alt or option, we could go up and down using the scroll wheel. So alt or option to go vertically, shift to go horizontally. So we can navigate that way so you don't have to grab the little line. So shift plus mouse scroll wheel, alt or option plus mouse scroll wheel. All right, so we have Jimmy Jones from San Jose, California, producer, keyboardist. Welcome to the live stream. Thanks for introducing yourself. All right, and we have Lawrence from Rhode Island. Great that you could join us. Hope you're doing well. Okay, so I see from Jeff Zabelski, Greg writing for 2 flutes / oboes. Can it be done on one instrument track and automatically create oboe 2 part from the one track, or easier to use 2 separate tracks opened at once in the editor? So you could do it either way. Depends how, I've seen some people do one track and set the one track. So let's say, if you add an instrument channel going to HALion Sonic SE, let's say, and if you put this on any, if you're playing both parts in simultaneously, but I see some people will put this on MIDI channel any, and then have the 2 instruments loaded here, and that way you could split like one key command you could dissolve by MIDI channel if you wanted to isolate the 2 different parts. If it's just for so if you wanted to, like, for orchestration purposes, if you're intending to do multiple parts that are printed out for real musicians to do, I would maybe do each, like oboe 1, oboe 2 on different MIDI channels, because otherwise you may have to manually do it. It may not take you that long if you're kind of playing the parts in. If it's just for playback, I wouldn't worry about it. You could do it all on, you could have both of the voices, oboe 1 and 2, and just play back on one MIDI track. When you double click, you're going to be able to edit the oboes, and double click on 2 flute parts. You can, or double click on one flute part, you could see the 2 parts and just kind of have it by instrument. So sometimes people may get particular because, with MIDI notes themselves, you have a note on, note off message. So if you're holding one note and you have a note off message on the same note, and it kind of goes, like let's say both are looking something. I'll just create a part here. And why some people will separate it is when we look at a MIDI part here. So let's say they're in unison, and then all of a sudden one part, oboe 1 continues to hold the B, the B2, but oboe 2 starts playing, kind of harmonies based on that. I'm sure that would be just awful sounding. All right. let's put a tritone and an oboe. All right. So, if you had stuff like this where, these were in unison and then they split, this may be easier on two separate tracks or two separate channels, because this note off message, like this note would probably play as soon as you have a note off message on the same MIDI channel. So just kind of a MIDI limitation of just, like two notes may not be able to be played at the same time. So it could depend upon your part as well. All right, so we have Greg. Is there a software manager that tells me if my VST instruments, HALion, Retrolog, etc., are current without having to manually check periodically? So generally, if there's any updates, you'll come over here and it'll be indicated in the news and tutorial section. So when you kind of come over here, so as there's new versions that are released, so generally you go, oh, okay, I could come here and I see Cubase 1102, and you'll see it kind of indicated here. You could manually check, but just get in the habit of reading the hub, because this is a great communication tool, just so that you could see exactly what's going on, if there's an update for this, an update for that, etc. So all right, so we have Brian checking in from Crystal Coast, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Pablo remembered his question. It was, can I smash the like button? So go for it. All right, so I just see from about dragging from Groove Agent, it says I try to do exactly as you do and I get new tracks all the time. So are you starting Groove Agent? Are you doing it from a MIDI track, from an instrument track, or a MIDI track? So let me know and I'll show you my preference. So when I do this, and so I'm doing it from an instrument track. So, but when we see the MIDI files, and generally MIDI, I'm not sure if the Groove Agent parts are actual MIDI files, like a standard MIDI files, like many others do. So I just have this set to, standard MIDI files on import to do this. But see if you're doing it from a MIDI track that's routed to Groove Agent as a virtual instrument, or from an instrument track, and see if that makes a difference for you. All right, so we see Omar is looking to maybe work with someone on learning production together. So who's starting off? All right, so we see which plugins separate the background noise out of the vocals. You could do a lot of that stuff with Spectral Layers 1. So let me see. I'll show you just quickly some of the stuff you could do that's Voodoo. Okay, so let's say if we have, so, a wonderful tool that you could do is we'll select this, and with Cubase 11, I think artist, but I know definitely in Pro, If we come to audio and go to extensions, you'll see Spectral Layers. And here, if you go under process, you could choose to, if you wanted to unmix stems. So at this point, it's going to do its magic. All right. All right, so now at this point, I could just drag the vocals out. So if I wanted to, and let's just, so that way you could just isolate the vocals directly from the backing track. So you could do that, and if you get the more, the more like Spectral Layers Pro, this will give you, noise reduction, hum reduction, click repair, clip repair, lots of kind of more, restoration based components as well. So, check out Spectral Layers 1. You could do a tremendous amount, and that comes with like Cubase Pro 11 as well. Okay. Okay, so we see from Drazy Eternal, awesome constrained delay compensation. All right. Okay, reading through all great comments. Okay, so we have all right, so we have Chris from Leicester, UK. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. So okay, so we see question. I'm on Catalina on my Mac Pro, and I cannot get F11 to work for love nor money. Changed the settings in Mac OS to make the F keys work, but makes no difference. Anything obvious I'm missing? So I have kind of a generic, like a multi-platform keyboard. And one of the things I have to do on mine is there's like a little lock button that also engages the, and if I don't have that turned on, then my like F11 key, so say if I do this now, if I hit F11, so sometimes, let me just check. So that will kind of turn it on and off. And let me just check my system. Yeah, some reason Apple wants to take all your function keys and then take them away on the MacBook Pro is kind of annoying. And it may be like somewhere else. Let me just see if I could just check something here. All right, so I'm just doing a quick search, but it seems like many other people have. All right, so let me try it because I was getting kind of the same thing. So it looks like it might be kind of just seeing, kind of looking at something online. It could be like maybe PRAM based. But if you want to email me, Michael, I could kind of dig a little more into a solution. But I think it's just kind of an Apple thing. So. All right, so Michael Teams and Michael Pierce want people to hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. And that way you can get notified of future live streams. Michael Teams is saying subscribe to the Hangout, get free stuff. So lots of free knowledge. Okay, so we have a question. How do you add swing to kick drum? So it can really depend on the part. You know, a lot of times swing could be, you know, depending on the part itself. But we show you how you can add swing. I'll just get to our project here quickly. Okay, so if we want to look at, let's say, and let me just put this into a quick loop. Okay, so I'll just take my kick here, and then you could just kind of go to, so if I wanted to select all the kicks, I could just shift and double click. And then if you wanted to just add swing, you could now, as soon as we come over here, you'll see the swing. And you could just add the swing amount. So, you know, depending on the parts that, you know, like the kick may not be the place where swing is, but let's say if I just put in a series of hi-hats and I just wanted to come here sorry, I'll set this to straight 16th notes. All right, and I'll just so here's where you could do, you'll notice more swing here. So let's say if I want to do something like this, and So you get set kind of your swing amount here. Just apply the quantize. So if you see where we were, and that's 76%. Let's do 100% and click apply quantize. That you could get your swing. So it's really just whatever you have selected there. Okay, so we're just saying from Drowsy Eternal, I bet my neighbor wonders whose voice is so loud. I have Greg's voice at volume 10 so I can hear it over airplanes in the vacuum. So yeah, I got recognized in a restaurant once with my wife. Someone recognized my voice from from Hangouts or videos. Okay, just reading through comments. Can you insert lyrics onto a vocal track? So we can put lyrics onto different tracks. So I think I have some lyrics, but yeah, generally the lyrics would go into the score editor. I've seen some people who will type lyrics into, so let's say I think I have lyrics for this in the notepad, so I will come over here and I just have lyrics, and we could kind of copy and paste these in. But what I see a lot of people do is just add a marker track, and then when we add a marker track, you could just kind of come here, and in the marker track description, you could just say, and you could copy and paste, and that way you could just kind of come over here and navigate, via the lyrics. And because a lot of times, singers I found like, oh yeah, I want to go to this line. And you're like, oh, is that the second verse? You're like, I don't know. Is that the third chorus? I have no idea, And if you do this, you could just say, oh, where you turn to this and okay, this is the line, and navigate to the lyrics. And if you go into the score editor, you could put lyrics in as well. So let me just see if I revert this quickly. So those are a couple different ways that you could, put lyrics in, but it's not in an audio track, but these two could be kind of linked together. Okay. Okay, so we have quick question. I've tempo mapped an audio. Oops, sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. See, I have lots of questions in my future. Okay, I've tempo mapped an audio reference, transcribed the song to MIDI, erased all the tempo map. Now I want to lay audio down guitar, but need to add the reference audio back to my MIDI. Is that possible to re-tempo map? Okay, so let's go and take a look at a particular project here. Let's see if I get that. Okay, so let's say we've now tempo mapped this. Okay, so it says, okay, so it says I tempo mapped an audio reference, transcribed the song to MIDI, erased the tempo map. Now I want to lay down guitar, but need to add the reference audio track back to my MIDI. Is that possible to re-tempo map? So yeah, once you've done that, you could definitely, re-tempo map, and I think you'll get the same results. So if you now want to go MIDI, import it again, and just do your tempo map, at that point, you'll see that you'll get the same results. So it shouldn't be a problem for you. All right, so let me just get something set up here quickly. All right, just reading through some different comments here. All right. So see, Joe also is having questions about interactive voice response. So, Joe, maybe if you could give more information on interactive voice response, what that is. Maybe I'm just not familiar with the term, so. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin making it from Montana. Okay, reading through different comments. Okay, we have a question. How do I make sure that the audio isn't changed or altered when importing from video or other sources? Sometimes it is in a different key, sped up, or otherwise altered. One is to, when you select the audio file, make sure it's not in musical mode. So that could change the tempo. Often when people import from a video file, that's could be indicative of a sample rate mismatch. And if you have a video file that's at 48K and you're putting it into a 44.1 project, that could change the pitch. So when you come to, you can go to the preferences and under editing, choose audio, and you want to convert to project settings and copy to project folder if needed. So, but if you're working with video files, it's probably going to be 48K. You could hit Shift plus S and that'll bring up your project setup. And at that point, that will take you, and you could adjust the sample rate there. So just kind of be aware of, this. Usually when I get that question, it's going to be a sample rate mismatch. All right, thanks for all the wonderful questions. We see that we're almost at 100 likes, so we're at 95 likes. So okay, so we have a question from Daryl. How to change the tempo on a single track while keeping the original tempo on all of the other tracks? Okay, so let's say I want to come here. One of the things you could do with tempo maps is, let's say we could have audio files follow the tempo or not follow the tempo just by placing it into musical mode. So if I let's say I have a tempo map of this jazz piece, and if I wanted to take another audio file, let's say maybe perhaps a drum loop, okay, so let's say I want to take this drum loop, and we could just kind of drop in that drum loop. And once I create it, I'm going to find just a downbeat of just this particular file. So let's say, so this will be our downbeat. Probably like right there. I'll just do this process again here from scratch just to show. Okay, so we have no tempo. I'm going to just set my offset here so I don't have one. Okay, so we put our click track on and there's no correlation. So I'm gonna go to my project menu and do tempo detection. And make an adjustment if necessary. All right, so let's say this is going to be where my 4/4 measure starts. So we have some pickup notes. Let's make sure I'll just listen to that again. So once we have kind of the tempo map set, you know, anything that you drag over any audio file, we could have this automatically follow the tempo or not. So if I place it into musical mode, it's going to follow the tempo. Now, one trick you could do if you want to have kind of like different tempos is I could just come right over here and choose to have a different track version. So I could say, now this track is not going to be in musical mode. I'm going to do a new version, and I want this tempo and I wanted, you know, this particular track here. So I can select that track and we could put that into musical mode. And then I could, if I wanted to alternate back and forth, we could choose to lock the position of that file. And now as it moves, it won't do that. And we say, okay, I want to take off musical mode and let's go back to the other tempo map. This will play back at the same time. So you could have kind of multiple tempo files, but you may just have to toggle the musical mode and work with different track versions. And then you could have kind of poly tempo music if you wanted to. Okay, we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to switch to a group channel and used as a stacked instrument and pass through to the next instrument channel with my native instruments keyboard? So if we have a number of instruments, I don't have a native instruments keyboard, so I'm not that familiar with it. But I will add, let's say, a couple of instrument tracks here. Okay, so I have all my retro log tracks. And let's say if, one of the things, so I'll just reread this. So, and use as a stacked instrument and pass through to the next instrument channel with my native instruments keyboard. So if these are all on separate channels, one of the things you could do is, maybe not using it as a group channel, but if we, see if this might help. But if we go to move selected tracks to new folder, when you right click, now every one of these, we could have all of the folders here. So if I just record, enable, or monitor the folder, that would automatically send the MIDI data to, to all of the included instruments. And if you needed to have multiple folders, you could probably just have your controller keyboard navigate between the different folder tracks. So if I just wanted to come here and, duplicate this, I'm not sure if it's for maybe like a performance type of aspect, but this way you could have, multiple instruments loaded here that are all stacked. And if you wanted to just, go, hit the down button, basically once you're in the track view, you could, just select the different folders to control different instruments. So let me know if that helps, Ian or M. But I don't know kind of the layout of the native instruments controllers. Okay, so question number 2, can you place key? So let's just see. I think it's keys. It says key switching, but I assume key switching on a separate small keyboard to keep your main keyboard clear for playing in Cubase 10.53. So yeah, if you're, I know lots of people that just have a 2-octave keyboard controller that just does the key switches, and maybe like a 49 or 61 key controller that's used for playing the parts, and one key that's just dedicated. So if they're all set to in all MIDI inputs, you don't have to do any configuration. So once you go to the MIDI port input, you could hit the small one keyboard for a key switch and the other keyboard for dealing, playing the part, the musical part. So you could combine multiple controllers that way quite easily. All right, so we see Michael Teams says, I have a Leslie running in the back of guitar track, so that's a good Peter Frampton trick. I'm sure his roadies loved him for it. All right, so we see that Jan's going to go watch the Eurovision Song Contest. So we'll see you on Friday's live stream, hopefully. Thanks for joining us. Reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great discussion and questions. Okay, so we have a question. How do we pitch just one sound of a chord written in MIDI? All right, so so let's say I'll just come here. All right, so let's say I'll just play an awful chord. I thought I muted that for a reason. All right, so. Okay, so when you say pitch just one sound, so let's say I have a chord. Okay, so, you know, if we have, so when you say pitch a sound, so if I wanted to, I could, you know, just take one note within a chord and move it. We could also just, you know, if we want to go to other notes within a chord, you could hit the left and right arrow keys and use the arrow key. So this is, I'm not sure if this is what you mean by repitching the chord. You could also, maybe if you come here, I think there was, let me just see if it's under MIDI functions, but I think that there are some ways to kind of switch chord voicings, you know, of a particular chord. Let's see if I remember where it's at. But let me know if that's what your question is, you know, so if you have just a chord being able, and one thing that a lot of people miss, let's say these are all, you know, starting at the same time, and you look at the Quantize and you're like, oh, how do I edit the velocity of just the middle note? So if you hold down, so say select, let me find the right modifier key. So Command plus Shift, you could adjust the velocity of one note within a chord. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Okay, we have a question. When I get a new plugin, I open a project to test it out. I now have 48 empty directories called untitled-nn. Can I just delete those? Yeah, certainly. So no problem. And one thing, if you don't want that to happen, I think that this was a change in Cubase 11. But just the default behavior. So when you go to a new project, you could just choose to prompt for project location. And that way you could have I have like a test project folder that I use kind of for that. So I know I could always delete everything in that particular folder, just kind of auditioning, trying different stuff. Okay, so question, which VST is best for auto tune, reverb, delay, and echo? So I would say for tuning, I would definitely use the VariAudio, and you know, because it's not necessarily a plugin, it's actually part of the editing process. So if I wanted to jump to this project, you know, I would go to the sample editor, go to VariAudio, and be able to do all my editing here. So it's not a plugin, but it's actually part of the editor. For reverbs, I would say if you're going more for like an acoustic environment, like a very particular acoustic environment, I would consider using Reverence. And this is a convolution reverb. If you wanted to kind of create spaces that maybe don't exist naturally, you could use Revelation. For delays. Probably the most powerful delay plugin ever conceived is going to be the multi-tap delay. And I would, if you mastered those four, you'd be in those four tools, you'll be in great shape. All right, so we have Graham. All right, so Graham's joining us late. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Okay, so a question from Daryl. I have a MIDI controller to control expressions, dynamics, and etc. However, I can't seem to get it to recognize or sync with Cubase. How do I sync them together? So really all you have to do is, once you have them connected to your computer, and you can see if they're connected by going to your studio menu to studio setup, and then clicking on MIDI port setup. And once you have MIDI port setup, you can make sure that you're seeing all of your MIDI controllers there. And you'll see this thing called in all MIDI inputs. So if you have that checked, anytime that you have a MIDI track, or instrument track, anytime that those are being sent to an instrument, it could accept any MIDI controller just utilizing that are checked in this list. We could also have it automatically mapped to a particular controller. But if you wanted to use one for playing notes, one for expression, one for key switches, like 3 different controllers, you could just choose in all MIDI inputs. And as long as those 3 controllers are checked in this list, then they should all be communicating. If you don't see it in this list, that means that the computer isn't recognizing the MIDI driver. And that's kind of outside of Cubase. It's how the computer is seeing the MIDI interface. So if you don't see it in this particular list, then your operating system of your computer, Windows or Mac OS, isn't seeing it, and then it's not being recognized for that reason. And Graham is pointing out that he's from Royal Wootton, Bassett in the UK. Okay, reading through comments. See lots of discussion on miking Leslie's and drums and people just bragging about their mics. So okay, just reading through questions. So we have some repeat questions. So if we could try to avoid repeat questions, that would be great. Okay, more microphone discussions. All right. All right, so a question connected my external instruments on my audio patch bay. When I use external instruments, I can't assign the same input audio to different instruments. Is this possible in Cubase? So once you have it defined, but what you may want to try, so you can think of it as kind of like a one-to-one relationship, because Cubase wants to, and I've had discussions with it with some of the product planning people, and they want it so that if you open up the project, they assume that that instrument is going to be kind of connected to, because it's very important when you open up a project that it's going to recall all of the different settings. But one of the things that you may want to try is, if you go to your external instruments, is saving it. Once you have it configured, just click on add to favorites. And this way you might be able to have multiple instruments and just be able to call it up and say, okay, I'm using this instrument with this particular input, and, with they're routed to these inputs in my audio interface, and try saving it, set up once and save it as a favorite. And then you could just simply, go to, your favorites and just add the different elements and recall the favorites. So give that a try. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Sorry if you've discussed this. I've left and come back. Does Cubase support multi-track editing? Can you group tracks? And can you use playlists like Pro Tools? So yeah, if I wanted to just group tracks, it's really all you had to do. Just open up a quick project, show you. So if I wanted to put them into a folder, I could move the folder and I could edit the folder itself. So if you wanted to do it that way, or if I wanted to group the events, like I want to take all of my drums, I could just hit Control or Command G, and those will be grouped. So as I move one, they'll all be worked with. And kind of, instead of playlist, we use what's called track versions. So you could come right over here and just do a new version. And at that point, you could just use all of the same effects, routing, and EQs. So we just call them track versions, but similar in concept, I believe. So. Okay, so we have a question. Is there any way we can adjust Quantize for string libraries? So I assume that this is where the string library, by the time the sample starts to sound, that, by the time it does that, it's slightly delayed. So I think what a lot of people can do is, you could save your own, custom Quantize preset if you want, but sometimes it could be a little tricky being ahead of the beat. What a lot of people, I think, can do is, when you go to a particular MIDI part, is you could adjust in milliseconds the track delay here. So some people will put that track just slightly ahead in milliseconds, so that that the bow can speak. And by the time the bow starts vibrating the string, and that's when you want it to be initially. So some people will just kind of take the MIDI event and shift it slightly ahead here, and then you could just do kind of like a normal quantize and have this be an independent factor that could be stored for each track. Okay, so we have a question. How is it possible to quantize drums as a group, also in removing hit points for all tracks with a single click? So yeah, we could definitely do it with drums. So say I have my drums here. And let's say I'll solo the drums here and put the click on. And as we do this, realize that it's the synth fill. So not the tightest. So what I'm going to do is let's find, I'm just going to hit Control U to ungroup. I'm going to find hit points for this, like, let's say a kick snare. And in this song, we have hi-hat. So I'm going to just come over. We'll zoom in just a little bit. Let's adjust our threshold so that we don't include snares and hi-hats. Let's come to, let's say, our snare top, and I want to adjust the threshold. Okay, and I'm going to go to the hi-hat in this case because it's pretty significant rhythmically at the beginning. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to place these into a folder, and then we could do group editing on the folder. So at this point, I go to the Quantize setup. I'm going to open up my Quantize panel, and we're going to choose priorities. So I'm going to say my kick has the highest priority. We'll say our snare top has the second highest priority, and let's make hi-hat our third highest priority. At this point, it's now basically assigned, markers, like hit points across all of the different files. So what I want to do now is to slice, and it's now sliced all the different parts based on that criteria. I will choose a quantize value. So let's say I choose 16th notes, and I will now choose to quantize. And we can see that these all get shifted. And as they get shifted, sometimes they'll leave gaps. And at that point, we want to crossfade those gaps. So now we listen to our drums with the click track. We had a snare fill, like a 16th notes or 8th notes coming up that rushed. And that's all you really had to do to kind of quantize multiple drums. Also, removing hit points for all tracks with a single click. So I think the hit points are kind of automatically put onto the files as they're recorded. So I'm not sure if they could be removed with a single click, but you could, once you go into the sample editor, you could reset them, but I'm not sure if it would make sense to remove all the, if you could tell me why you want all the hit points to be removed. So. Okay, so we just see Daryl saying, I've subscribed to the channel, but I'm not getting notified. How come? So it's just a kind of a regular YouTube function. So, but we tend to always do it at 1:00 U.S. Eastern time on Tuesdays and Fridays. So we've been pretty consistent for the last 14 months or so. So. All right. Okay, so just see, I think this is related to the drum quantizing. It says, yes, I've done that, but it seems like every time I want to adjust something, it just does it for the selected track, not all of them, even when I'm editing them all together. So again, the thing you want to look for is on the folder track is just to make sure that this group editing is enabled. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Okay, so a question from Jay from Connecticut. I'm not sure if I understand immerse correctly. I was under the impression that it simulated room monitoring. Am I mistaken? Is it for providing ambisonic surround for audience? So generally, it could be for an audience, but most of the time, if it's going to be kind of more of an immersive environment for an audience, generally I haven't seen a lot of performances. I guess it could happen where the audience is all wearing headphones. So then that's kind of where the ambisonics can really work. But if, there are theaters, we're seeing more and more where, perhaps people are setting up, Yamaha has AFC systems that kind of do this. Other companies have systems that are designed to have speakers above, behind, and on the sides and be able to scale kind of like a traditional movie theater for like Dolby Atmos. So, so immerse could, kind of works for all those definitions, but, ambisonics is often a way to do it without having to have the speakers. But if people are listening to it, generally that's going to be done through speakers and, typical panning. So. All right, so seeing lots of piano maintenance discussions. All right. All right, and my chat field just jumped on me. Okay, so I think I'm back near to where I was. Okay, reading through. All right, so lots of great piano discussions and piano maintenance. Okay, so I just see a question. Can I disable safe mode? So I think safe mode is only entered when when you start the program. If this is a safe mode I'm thinking of, is like allows you to bypass preferences and different like plugins, is just by holding Alt or Option, Command or Control, and plus the Shift key when you're starting Cubase. If you don't hold that down, you're disabling safe mode. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding your question. Okay, lots of great discussion on pianos and climates. Okay, so we have a question from Mark Rabin. Can you render to mono? All right, so say if I wanted to take just a little portion of this. So if you wanted to like do a quick, let's say if I just wanted to take an individual part, and let's say do a render in place. I'm not sure if it's for a mix, but if I just choose to so I'll just come here to render settings, and at this point I could just choose dry. And if I wanted to, if I had a whole bunch of edits, I could just come right over here. And if I choose dry, that will keep no signal processing. So when I render, I could just take that one event and it'll render it directly underneath. That'll be dry. If I wanted to do it for an entire mix, I would just select just a little portion here for expediency's sake and go to export to audio mix down. And then if we choose, I can say, okay, I wanted to do my stereo out, but we could also choose to do a mono down mix. And let's add that to the queue, and we'll insert that, create an audio track. And then we just have a mono file for a down mix. So those are two different ways to render to mono. Okay, so we have a question. Can you teach some mastering, please? So if you want to see it within Cubase, probably if I was going to do some mastering in Cubase, so we have Wavelab, which is a phenomenal mastering program. But let's say, if you want me to do it inside of Cubase, I would probably take a stereo audio file, and let me just revert this. And it really could depend on what your definition of mastering is. Some people just, say, okay, I'm just processing my stereo file. But if I was doing something like a mastering inside of Cubase, so say I wanted to do, at this point, we could just do almost like more of a, go to the mix console, and at this point we could apply different plugins. So if I wanted to come to EQ, so let's say I just want to take off some of the low end. So we can say, okay, let's go to band 1, and what type of EQ do we want this to be? So let's say, okay, I want it to be and one of the things that's really cool is you can put this auto listen mode on. And then you're only hearing what you're affecting with the EQ. And let's run it through just a little bit. Maybe the Imager plugin that we were showing earlier. And then some people would always want to run it through and let's say we want to run it through maybe like a maximizer type or brick wall limiter, typical. So if I wanted to bypass all the inserts where we were, so maybe little stuff like that that you could do to kind of give you more of a mastered sound. So, but you know, there are, you know, this is kind of one aspect of mastering, but you know, burning the CDs, making, you know, embedding all the metadata, delivering to multiple formats. That's where Wavelab is really kind of key for those workflows. Right, so I just see Rob H mentioning his question got skipped over, so I'm sorry if I didn't see it. I'll scroll back. But if you could just ask your question again, I try to get all the questions, but sometimes there's a lot of discussion, so I apologize if I missed your question, Rob. Okay, so we have a question. When overlapping two audio files on the same track, then removing the overlap from the two audio files, one of the audio file clips removes part of the region. I can't find a setting to avoid this. Okay, so let's say we have two different audio files here. And I think this might be to avoid this. Maybe if you go to editing, to audio, or editing, and then delete overlaps, try unchecking that, because now if that is checked, when I overlap two events, like that part gets erased. So if I drag this over, that part, as this is being dragged on top, gets erased. The data is still there. So, but try, if this is what you mean, try going to preferences, to editing, and make sure that delete overlaps is unchecked, and see if that makes a difference for you. Okay, so a question, signing in a little late. Sorry if you've already covered my question. Could you do a quick run through on controlling and editing automation? Okay, so let's say if I wanted to take this particular track, and let me just filter my input channels. I'll just go back to where we were originally. So let's say, okay, so I have this track and now I've done some automation on it. So I click on the W and the R and I move the fader. Right. And if you wanted to hold down the shift key, you get fine control. Or you could get really, just normal control, and holding down shift will kind of give you fine control over that. Now let's say I've done this and now I want to do editing of the automation. So let's say, okay, this I wanted to tame, like this automation, to make it, I could select just the region of the automation if I wanted to bring that down. So if we select the automation here, we could, we could select it just like this or using the range tool. So if I wanted to bring everything down proportionally or up proportionally, I could go to the top center. I could also kind of tilt. So if I want that, but I want more of a fade in and I want it to fade to be louder, we could do that. If I wanted, we'll undo that. If I wanted the automation to be a little tighter, a little more compressed, I could go to the right center edge, and then we could just come right over there and expand or compress that just that easily right there. Other things that you could do if you need to automate also from the info line, you could just kind of come over here and scroll. If you wanted to copy and paste, I could just hit, Control or Command C, move my playhead, and paste that same automation to another track or to the same spot later in time. So those are a couple of little automation tips and tricks that you could do. One other thing, if you go to the automation panel, there's some, you could choose to, only automate suspending. You could suspend the reading of particular automation parameters. But if you go to settings, you could also choose to show data on the tracks. And this way, as you kind of zoom in, you could see the waveform there. So that way you don't have to imagine it, especially if you're multiple parameters deep. You could just see the automation directly in the background. Okay, so we have a question. How can I get rid of event names in the key and sample editors? Those names are situated in left and right upper corners near triangles and do not allow to set their cursor. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm just going to add. Okay, so let's say if we want these labels to be gone here, so let's. Okay, hang on, just see if I could. So let's see if we can. So I'm not seeing, I thought that there might have been one. Okay, so we see this show part borders. Turn that off right there, and that's in the MIDI editor. Let's take a look at the sample editor. I'll choose just a small. I'll just drag quick loop in. Okay, so same function right here. So just look for this little icon to show audio event. So it doesn't look like, let's just check. So check that. And in the MIDI editor, check this window there. And then those names should disappear for you. If I misunderstood, just let me know. All right, just reading through different comments. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel. Okay, so just see, so I tried importing from the video in the right sample rate and used the preferences to convert as well. It's still sped up. So, make sure that when you select this from our previous question, that when you have the file here, make sure that it's not in musical mode. So select the file, and you could also do this from the pool window. So we can go to our pool window, go to audio, and at this point we could just have it, you can see musical mode, make sure that that is unchecked, because otherwise it may just try to match the project tempo. If so, give that a shot. I just ran into that the other night. Okay, so I see, hi, is it possible to quantize drums as a group, as in removing hit points for all tracks with a single click? So I'm not sure if, we showed it just a little bit, but so when we do the groups, each one will be kind of applied to its own, the hit points for each individual one. So. Okay, so to see, the question is, how do we pitch bend to a single sound in the chord? So, the MIDI specification itself doesn't allow you to do that, but some of the Steinberg instruments of VST 3.5 and higher, like Retrolog, you could do that. So let's go ahead and do a new project. And you can do this with HALion, Sonic SE, Pad Shop, Retro Log. So okay, so this is kind of beyond what the MIDI spec is. So say I just okay, so I recorded that, and now I want to pitch bend one single note within the chord. That now I could just double click here, and we would go to like the expression editor. So you want to make sure you could do this a couple different ways. One is if you click on this E, I could now just double click. So in the original MIDI spec, you know, a pitch bend was going to be for every single note on that particular MIDI channel. So every note in a chord would have pitch bend. But if I wanted to now just double click on a note, once we have this E checked here, we could go to what we call note expression. And I could say, let's go to tuning, and I'm just going to go to the middle note, and I could just draw it. So now when we go to look at it, just that one note is going to do pitch bend while the others stay at their steady pitch. So we'll just look at it. So that's how you can do it. So make sure that you have the E turned on here in the MIDI editor, and you could just double click and you could draw in, like if I want to take this note and change the volume so that it starts off and the note slowly kind of fades in, we could do that as well. So let me know if that was kind of answering your question, but so that's how you can do pitch bend on a single sound within a chord. Okay, so we see with Cubase 11 Pro installed, is there any need to install basic effects that was bundled with the UR22? It definitely can't hurt. You paid for them. One of the, you know, little hidden gems in the basic effects suite, and it's kind of a horrible name, but if you wanted to, let's say, just go to like the inserts, it's definitely worth it. I mean, Yamaha has been well known and highly regarded for their reverbs for years, but you can now come over here and the RevX reverb, you get that as a software plugin, and that's an amazing sounding reverb that's definitely worth having in your arsenal of plugins. So check out like the RevX reverbs. Also, if you go to dynamics, you have the morphing channel strip. So you could come right over here and just, this is a combination EQ and compressor that's pretty stellar as well. So Yamaha's been doing DSP technology for a long time. They invented the digital mixer. So you could have access to many of those processes from the digital mixer in those plugin suites. So it's definitely worth doing. Okay, so we have, how can we edit MIDI CC other than velocity? So once you're in the editor, all you have to do is click there. You could see all of your different MIDI CC messages, and you could draw them in kind of as you see fit. So you could It's not only the velocity here. So if you wanted to, and if you want to see more lanes, click on the plus sign. So you can say, okay, I want to see velocity and volume. And when you get into, let's say, expression. So, and sometimes you may not have enough visual height for that, but now if you take it full screen, you can say, okay, I want to see expression and modulation. So you could just see all of your various MIDI CCs directly here. And you could store these as presets. I was working with the wonderful pianist, Nari Soul. So that's how little one that we made for her, just to kind of show the different MIDI CCs. So just kind of click here and you could expose, click on the plus sign. You could click on the word velocity to see them, or click on a plus sign to add additional MIDI CC lanes. Okay, so we see Sergo Casimir says, I think I love Cubase. Well, that's good. I think it's a pretty spectacular program. All right, so question, how to find a WAV file, which we've used in a project in the Media Bay. I've asked this question before, but wanted to know how to find them in the Media Bay when we dragged them into a project. So if you, I'm not sure if you need to, if you know where the location is. So if you dragged it into a project, one of the preferences to simplify this process is if you go to editing to audio to automatically copy to project folder if needed. So that's a great thing to check so you don't have to go hunting for it afterwards. If you have the file and you don't know where it is, you could go to the pool window. And if we, let's say I just come over here and I have different audio files in my project here. So when we go to our pool window under media, at this point you could see exactly as you slide over, it'll give you the path, and that will show you exactly where that particular audio file is. So let's say if I jump back to this project, and I go to the pool window, we could just see everything that's in this particular path. So we say, okay, it's going to be in Giondo Documents, Projects, Amos Moses. So if I wanted to then go to the Media Bay, I could, follow this same path. It's okay, we're going to Documents to Projects. And at this point, I wanted to go to Amos Moses, and then I could see all the audio files there. So those are a couple of different ways, but if you're looking for audio files that you kind of dragged in, it's like, oh, where is that? Another thing that you could do in a pool is just to right click and click on Prepare Archive. And if you have files scattered throughout your multiple locations, that will consolidate and move them into the project folder for you automatically. Okay, Greg, I have a great question. Is there a keystroke for changing the focus of the mixer? I just use one, like focus on inserts, EQs, or sends. So I think we could do it. Let's take a look. I don't think we could change that in this mix, in the lower zone mix console, but you could click here to switch between the different views. But you could set up different configurations. So let's say I want to hide my input channels, and so I wanted to see all of my inserts. So let's say if I had a number of inserts here, so I just wanted to put a Let's just put a squasher on every one of the inserts. All right, so I'll just populate some stuff here. All right, so let's say I have all these different plugins. All right, so it says I wanted to changing the focus. So let's say now I have sends. So I wanted to let's say add a delay and a reverb. Let me just add okay, so I'm going to add a delay and a reverb as sends to all the tracks. Okay, so, and let's say I also have like my channel strip. So I want to close the EQ view. So let's say I wanted to have the compressor. So what I could do now is let's say I have the compressor active on all these different tracks, or let's switch it to maybe Magneto. Okay, so if I wanted to change okay, so right now what I want to do is to set this up, and I'm going to say, let's go to configuration. So I'm going to add a configurations, and we'll call this strip. And now I wanted a configuration that, let's say, had this closed. And I just wanted to see sends. So if I come here, and let's say I just now, I think this will work. Let's see. Okay, so now if I just switch to sends, let's go to my channel strip. I could just kind of switch the focus between these different components. And, you know, you could have keyboard shortcuts to, I think, recall 8 of those. So that's how you could just change just the focus to the particular element that you want to see. Just have those stored as configurations. And then everything else can be hidden in just one keyboard shortcut, and you can see exactly what you want to see. So I just see a question also, are you using Spectral Layers? So yeah, we're showing Spectral Layers as well. So we've shown a couple of questions. And just seeing from Cranky Man, I'm not sure if this question was asked before we did the drum thing. So it says, when I just on... so the thing is that when I adjust a hit point on one of the tracks, it doesn't adjust it for the rest of the tracks. So I have to go one by one. So the reason why you kind of set those hit points is because of phase relationships. Because if you actually are working on your drum kit, and let's say you have a snare mic, you know, this, when you hit the snare, it's going to be in the snare mic, the kick mic, the overheads, the toms. So if you quantize just a snare independently in a live drum recording, so you may quantize the snare, but that snare is still present in the other microphones, and you'll get all sorts of really bad phasing problems, and the drums will sound really weird. So that's why they're kind of locked together, so that when you have the kick that's going to be in multiple microphones, that all of them move. That the snare that's in multiple microphones, they all move together. So. Okay, reading through some more comments. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, just reading through comments. Okay, so just a question. I worked with vocals and guitar recording recently and realized I need to arrange orchestral instruments for a future composition, but I don't know how to do it. So once you have the recordings in the project, so let's say if you just have, a guitar and voice directly in the project, you can just add all of your other parts, MIDI data for your orchestral parts directly within the same part, just using, whatever orchestral library you want, whether it's, HALion Symphonic Orchestra or Iconica. So yeah, so it's definitely easy to do. All right, so my chat field just jumped on me, so. Okay, so I think I found my spot, so sorry about that. All right, we see Jazz Dude finally made it. It's probably been on for a while. All right, let me make sure I found my spot correctly. Okay, so I think I'm okay. All right, so I just see Cranky Man saying I don't understand his question, but okay, so we see Cranky Man says, Greg, I'm using audio warp for the drum quantize, not the slice way. So yeah. So I'm not sure if you've tried the slice way or if you're just only using audio warp, but either way, yeah, I think you still would need to find the hit points And again, the reason for the hit points is so that, okay, so just seeing more discussion. Okay, so I just see the main problem for me is the drum part. I have no idea how to select the drum part. Can you tell us more about the drum installation module, Groove Agent? I can't really understand how to use it. So I think this might be like if we have just like a recording of like, let's say the acoustic guitar. So let's say if I wanted to, let's see if I can find something that is, so let's say if we have something, let me see if I could find something quickly with, okay, so I'll just kind of use my jazz example so I don't have to look. But if you want a Groove Agent to sync, so Groove Agent, we could think of it as two components. One is it's going to be an actual drum module library, but it's also going to do patterns, and those patterns can follow whatever tempo you have. So let's say I am here and I'm going to just start, do a quick tempo detection on this file. All right, so now that I've done this, and if I want to lay like a drum pattern with this, I could just add an instrument track. And let's say I wanted to have Groove Agent play along with this. And I'm going to add, like, let's say percussion to this. Or I'll just do a quick Groove Agent example here. So I'm going to load a kit with patterns. And let's say I want it to be maybe jazz. So now I could just say follow transport. And I'll just choose the pattern here. And I'm going to just find a quick downbeat here. It says, all right, and let's say this is our downbeat. So now this drum is just going to follow, or any drum pattern that I have. So I could just say, let's do like a pop drum pattern here. So Groove Agent, now that it can just automatically come right over here and just play. I'll find something that's highly more inappropriate. So let's say, so anything that I do, this will automatically just kind of synchronize. So now, So I just picked all horrible examples, but this Groove Agent will automatically follow the tempo once you have a tempo pattern that's been extracted from the original. But you could just start off with very basic. Okay, I want to come over here, and you know, if I was starting from scratch, so I will just load up just a basic kit. And if I was writing a song, instead of using a metronome, I would come over here. You have the instruments where you could play the different instrument sounds as you work. And you have the pattern pads, and you hit the letter E to go back and forth. You have intros, as well as, you know, different endings. So fills, but if I just come here, I could play that pattern. So I could just hit play. And, you know, there's acoustic agent kits as well as kind of beat agent kits. So the acoustic agent kits look like a real drummer and will behave like a real drummer. So if you wanted to be more active or to be less dynamic, and you could just click on follow transport. So when you hit play, that, you know, Groove Agent will just automatically start to play. So I hit play in Cubase. I have drums that are accompanying me. It's just kind of that easy. So when I stop my Cubase transport, and that's just kind of loading up kit and hitting follow transport. And then you could just drag and drop these to different, you know, patterns if you wanted to. So if I just say, okay, I have my Groove Agent right here. I like that pattern. I can just drag it right onto the actual part. So that's a quick kind of how to get started with the Groove Agent. Okay, so just just finding my spot again here. Sorry about that. Okay, so I just see so some more discussion on the hit points and the drum slices. So it says, so, you know, Gareth is saying, yeah, you know, when you create the hit points with group editing and you deselect the group editing, you can add or remove hit points. And then Cranky Man saying, yeah, I could do it one by one, but I need to be able to remove or adjust a single hit point across all tracks since they have been already hit pointed according to the priorities. So the priorities don't put the hit points there. The priorities just split. So the hit points aren't embedded when you do that. So it just splits based on those, but it's using the hit points that have been derived from the priorities that you defined. So when you do that, it's not actually embedding the hit points based on those priorities. So the hit points are independent. So, all right, so we see a quick question, how to pick up styles in Groove Agent. So if you wanted to add styles, once you have Groove Agent open, so let's say I'm here, I could play this pattern, click on the little envelope, or just you'll see this little folder, and then you'll see styles. So you can say, okay, I wanted to do more funky. So I could just come right over here. And you could audition different patterns. And this will automatically sync to your project tempo. So if you slow down to tempo. So that's how you could audition different drum patterns. So again, click on this little folder icon and just have that, and then click on styles and you could audition different styles. So we see I have an unusual question. I often listen to the sound blurry after about a half an hour. I hear what is coming from the monitors. I do not come across anything remarkable. So when you say, so often listen to the sound blurry after about half an hour. So, it could be that, try, some of the best mixing engineers I know just monitor really softly. Sometimes, monitoring can be tricky if you're not in a very well treated room. And one way to, alleviate a poorly treated room is monitoring quieter so that the reflections aren't bouncing off as much. So, if it's sounding blurry, maybe change the position of your speakers. Make sure that you're kind of like it's a triangle. Your one point and your speakers are kind of equilateral angles from you. Try that, and maybe just try different monitoring. So, like changing the monitors or changing your monitor volumes. Okay, reading through more questions. Okay, just reading through more discussion of hit points. Okay, it says when I create a new groove quantize, sometimes the Cubase not finding the true position. Is this a bug? What can I do for solving that? So yeah, depending on, I'm not sure how you're making the actual groove. So if we have, let's say, if I wanted to come here and just select like just a little bit of the loop here. So let's say I will split this, or let's say from a drum loop, we could, so if we just come to our hit points here, we could just say create groove, and then it's automatically been placed into our groove quantize settings here. So we could just see that, and then you could access that, and you could save the preset, rename it. So, and if it's for MIDI, you could just drag a MIDI part directly into the quantize panel, and that will save it as well. So when you say it's not finding its true position, so I'm not sure if it's a file location, but if you just wanted to, again, save the preset, you should be able to, and then it's going to be stored within your preferences folder and your presets so that you could use it on different projects. Okay, so we have a question. Can you show us how to add labels to verses, choruses, bridge, etc. on a track view? So there's a number of ways of doing it. One is you could just come right over here and add an arranger track, and this would allow you to add like an arranger event. So once we're here, you hold down Alt or Option, and we could call this verse, chorus. So that's one way. Another way people will do is utilizing markers to work on that as well. All right, so we have a question from Peter K. When I switch back and forth between mix and edit, the mix screen does not show the same channels. It always goes back to the beginning. All right, so let's say if I have, I'll just load up kind of a larger project. All right. Okay, so let's see if I go to my mix console. So let's say I have that channel selected. I hit F3 to go to my mix console. Let's say if I don't have a channel selected. And let's say if I navigate now all the way, let me just take this all the way to the end where you see FX mono to delay. So that will always kind of show me the last audio track there. So it seems to kind of retain its settings. I'm not sure if I'm doing something differently, but usually when I tend to go back and forth. All right, glad that Randy Lee could make it. I know we had a couple of questions that were sent in, so let's get to those before we run out of time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Hope everyone's learned something new. Okay, so we covered the first one already. Okay, we have a question. What's the best way to add an effect to an input channel so that the artist can hear the effect, but the signal but the signal to be recorded dry? I have Cubase 11.02. Thanks in advance. And this is Deeks from London in the UK. So really, all you have to do is, if you put it on the inputs channel, that will embed the effect onto the signal. So if you put a reverb on the input channel for the artist to hear, that reverb is recorded with the signal. And we can see our input channels will generally be in red, faders on the left. So if I go to my audio connections, let me just add a couple of additional. All right, so if I have these input channels, so putting the effects here is on an insert, that will embed it. Putting it on the audio track that they're recording will not embed it. Now, if you don't hear the effect on the audio track while it's recording, it could be that the audio interface that you're using, you may have to take it off of direct monitoring. Most interfaces, some have DSP, and some have the DSP so that you could, put it into direct monitor and monitor through the DSP. But others, what the direct monitoring often does with most interfaces, it takes the input directly to the output and bypasses. So if you have direct monitoring, try shutting that off and putting it as an insert, and then they monitor that. It's recorded dry and it's just monitored through the effects. Okay, so we have a question, switch projects. Is it possible to have Scale Assistant active in the project window? So the Scale Assistant is really designed to work with a particular MIDI track. So it's, only for MIDI data. But if we wanted to see the Scale Assistant from within the project window, all we have to do is we could just double click here. We go to the MIDI editor, and then we could see Scale Assistant accessible directly from the within the project window. But when we double click on a MIDI part, we could see that we have, this will be, the inspector parameters for the MIDI editor, but we're on the project window. Okay, one more thing. Is it possible, question, to automate fine tuning? I know you can use transport track, but that only works for semitones. So if I wanted to, I'll just do this with a quick test tone. Okay, and I'll just turn the volume down here a little bit. All right, so let's say I record my test tone here. Okay, so if I wanted this to automate kind of fine tuning, so we have the transpose track, and the transpose track will do, little tiny bits, but I could come select this and go to the info line, and we see fine tune control here. So I can say, okay, let's leave that at 0. I'll select the next one. Let's go up 20 cents. Let's go up another 20 cents, up to 40 cents. And let's go down minus 20 cents. So I think we should maybe be able to hear this. So let's listen to our test tone track. So this will, so for each one of those, you could set different tuning values there. So give that a shot and see. Let me just turn that off. So try playing with the fine tuning and see if, I think you could probably get that to work. Okay, so it says we have question. If I play piano piece with the melody on top, the way I'd like to be able to make a selection of the whole melody is of the highest notes in the logical editor. It's not highest pitch because that only selects one pitch, the highest of the piece. There's a possibility of making Cubase choose the second and third note from the root, but that doesn't work either. I believe it's because the piano piece, there's not always the same number of notes in each chord. As I mentioned, so if you have kind of like piano parts with melody, let's see if I have something that, Let's see if I have this one piece I was thinking of. So what you might have to do is to say, okay, I want my piano part to be selected, above, a particular range. So it's not necessarily like the highest notes, but let's say if I wanted to select all the notes, above D3. So these will be maybe our melody parts. We could come to the logical editor, and we don't have to select just the highest note, but you could come over and say, okay, let's select notes, and we'll say that are higher. Okay, so I'm going to say let's type is equal to notes, and we're going to say value 1, the pitch is bigger than D3. So it's not just the highest note in a chord. It's not just so at this point, it'll just select those particular notes above that particular range, and you could copy and paste and cut. All right, let me go back to the live stream. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. We have about 5 more minutes and we'll get wrapped up. Hope everyone's learned a new trick. And if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button, and also that you subscribe to the channel. Okay, so I just see from HALion, Bala says my Cubase 10.5 crashes when I use Groove Agent. So let me know if it's if you give some information on which if it's a particular kit, if it's a Beat Agent kit, or if it's every kit or in every project, and what OS that you're using. That would be helpful. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so we just see a question. Are expression map articulations available in the lanes? So yes, all you'd have to do is just kind of click here and you could see articulations dynamics. And then if you have an expression map open, you would see all of them become visible right in the in that zone right there, the lower zone of the lane. Okay, so I just see Millard Brown. Greg, I just tried to do tuning and note expression. I don't see that as a parameter. Is there a setting or preference I need to do? Thanks. So make sure, one, it's going to be an instrument that's capable of doing it. So let's say if I wanted to add an instrument track, let's do retro log. And then we go to note expression. You should see tuning, but you could also just see available parameters. So if I just wanted to come here. I think we could. But generally, it's going to be tuning that's available. So, and this could be linked to the particular instrument. But you could just, so make sure that you see tuning there. But generally, tuning is one that's generally available for most instruments. Okay, see if we have one last minute question that we can get. I just see question from Mark Raven. Greg, do you freelance as an engineer producer? I don't really have time. I'm kind of incredibly busy with work and family stuff. So occasionally I'll do some bass playing, like do some bass playing for Gareth and Michael Teams and Pablo and some other composers I've been doing some bass playing for. But occasionally I get a can you solve this? But not as much as I would like to. So maybe when my son is older. So. Okay, so we just see how can I change the language in Cubase? So if you go to preferences, you'll see general, and then you could just come over here and choose to language. All right, so from John Koskian, hi Greg, does consolidate files move or copy files? So it copies them to the new location. Okay, we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for a wonderful live stream. We'll do it again on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you want to send questions in advance, send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next on Friday. Take care.